Ryerson. My name is Kelly Skirvin, and welcome to Ryersonian TV. Tonight, the candidates for RSU executive positions debate the issues. We're bringing you live pre-debate coverage. At 5 p.m., we'll be live streaming the debate from the Student Campus Center. Let's take a step back and look at what's happened in the last year within the RSU. It all started a year ago when the Eye-Opener reported RSU credit card statements showing thousands of dollars spent on food, alcohol, and entertainment. Ryersonian reporter Dea Kodra brings us all the details of what happened before and after that credit card scandal.
You might have seen that the Ryerson Students' Union has been in the news a lot recently. What happened? On January 28, 2020, the Ryerson Students' Union president, Vanessa Henry, announced the union had taken legal action against Ryerson University. This came days after the university announced it was immediately terminating its agreement with the RSU and would no longer recognize it as Ryerson's official student government. The claim the RSU filed asked that the university recognize the union as Ryerson's student government and return their funds. When students pay their tuition, the university collects the money on behalf of the RSU. The problem with that is that the university announced they would be withholding these funds in January 2019. This money is supposed to be given to the RSU for programming, student groups, and equity service centers. Now here's the catch. The RSU is claiming that the university cannot legally do that. If you don't remember, back in January 2019, the Eye-Opener reported that credit card statements under the names of RSU's president Ram Ganesh, Vice President Operations Severine Gasol, and Financial Controller Darshini J showed purchases totaling thousands for food, alcohol, clothing, and entertainment. To better understand all of this, let's go further back in time. In May of 2018, the RSU fired their general manager. The general manager is responsible for overseeing the union's finances. But why? Well, their goal was to split the responsibilities of the GM into two new jobs. But they never actually hired someone to handle their finances. Instead, they gave one credit card to the president and another one to Vice President Operations. The intention of the credit card was to cover expenses from RSU events and other union activities. This violated the RSU's own financial policy. It says that only the GM and financial controller can have credit cards. All of a sudden, purchases started racking up. But here's the catch. Some of those purchases didn't appear to be RSU related. At a board meeting on February 1st, the financial controller said that the total amount spent on those cards was $273,000. Yep, $273,000. Jumping to February 11th, the board voted to impeach Ganesh. They also voted to suspend Gasol. Remember, these were the two people who held onto those credit cards. The RSU then elected McLean DeWeaver to be their new president. Ryerson told the RSU it had to complete a forensic audit. The RSU hired PricewaterhouseCoopers to do the forensic audit. An audit is a process that involves examining a company's financial records. A forensic audit could be used to gather evidence for a court case. On January 21st, 2020, the RSU announced a police report was filed after the financial review was complete. It reviewed the credit card expenses of the three former RSU members accused of misspending funds. But on February 3rd, the union announced that because of cost and time, they instead had PricewaterhouseCoopers do a review of the RSU's credit card expenses. Following this financial review, RSU's audit committee found $99,477 in expenses that they couldn't verify the legitimacy of. The total amount of money spent by the former union executives was also confirmed to be $260,000 instead of $273,000. Why should you care about the RSU's finances? In the 2018-2019 academic year, students paid $78 per year for RSU expenses. There's over 32,000 full-time undergraduates at Ryerson. That means the RSU gets over $2.5 million per year from students. Now, this amount has changed in September 2019 as students were able to opt out of the RSU fees per the Student Choice Initiative. This money is supposed to go towards things like administrative staff and expenses, as well as campus groups. Since February of 2019, the RSU and the university have been trying to come to an agreement on their operating terms, but no luck. On January 30th, the RSU held a blackout demonstration to show what the campus would look like if a students' union didn't exist. During the blackout demonstration, some equity service centers were shut down. This meant that student centers like the Campus Center front desk and copyright were closed. The Good Food Center remained open. So, what happens next? On January 29th, the school announced their next steps for creating a new student government. They will hold an election for a new government structure in March and a general election in April. But the RSU says they still plan to run an election. Voting opens February 12th to the 14th, so get ready to hit the polls, Ryerson. For the Ryersonian, I'm Dea Kodra.
Joining us in studio to break down the issues driving this election are Ryersonian reporter Sharina Harris and co-lead in RSU Equity Service Center, Adam Asmar. Sharina, you've been covering the RSU for about a year now. What would you say is your biggest story about the union?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I think there are so many stories that I could choose from, but what I think is a really big story right now is the fact that the RSU is going ahead with their elections for the 2020-2021 term. So obviously those elections are tonight, that's why we're here today. But at the same time as the union is holding elections for their 5 executive positions and their board of directors members, Ryerson is also going ahead with facilitating a process for elections for a new student government structure, which students will vote on in March, and then whoever wins that has to commit to running general elections in April. So I think there's a lot of confusion around that and a possibility that, like, are we going to end up with 2 different student governments? One of them obviously is not recognized by Ryerson, one of them is. So students are going to head to the polls this week for the RSU and again in March, which I think is pretty significant.
Thank you. Adam, you've been involved with the RSU as a board member for a year and as a co-lead at Rye Access and Equity Service Center. For those who don't know exactly how a student union works, can you just take us through your responsibilities as a board member and a lead at Rye Access?
Sure. So as a board member, responsibilities vary depending on how invested you want to be. But I was a Faculty of Arts representative for the 2017-2018 academic year, and my responsibilities were to bring the needs of my faculty, the Faculty of Arts, to the general board. And at bare minimum, my responsibilities were to go to meetings, complete my board hours, which is volunteering at certain events around campus, doing administrative work, and attend annual general meetings.
Okay, thank you. So let's meet some of the 2020-2021 RSU candidates. Co-executive broadcast producer Amanda Pope asked Ali Youssef, Charmaine Reed, and Zima Orani why they decided to run for their position. Leora Dubinsky, who is running for VP Operations with the Rise slate, did not respond to our interview request before press time.
President was a big decision. It felt like I needed to take one step up from what I did last year and double down on the efforts that we needed, and that involved running for president instead of just a vice president position.
RSU needs some sort of experience and a team of highly passionate and motivated students who want to do something good, who want to help the student union get out of this situation in the best possible way in which the students tell us to.
A lot of the changes that the RSU needs is in regards to the VP operations role, and it fits best to my portfolio. I have worked as a VP finance in my course union. I have worked as VP operations in the debate society, so it really fits my portfolio, and I feel like I can do a lot in this position.
So Sharina, what reasons did the RSU give for not completing that forensic audit?
Yeah, so they kind of had 2 main reasons that they outlined in the document that they did release, which was not an audit but a financial review. So the first one was that it was too expensive to complete a full forensic audit. Now, I've been back and forth a bit with the RSU and with the university trying to figure out whether or not the RSU asked for additional funds to complete an audit and whether or not the university declined that request, and if they would have been willing to give the RSU funds. The RSU says that they were in a position, and they made it clear to the university that they were in that position where they couldn't afford a full audit given the way their finances were after the Student Choice Initiative, Ryerson says that they did not receive a request from the RSU. So that was the first thing, it was too expensive. The second thing was that it would have taken too long. So the RSU said that they had a lot of students demanding answers, which I can certainly say I have seen as well over the last year, and they just wanted to get something out in a more timely fashion, and that ended up being a financial review that came out on February 3rd at their semi-annual general meeting.
Okay, and what were the results of that financial review that came out on that Monday night?
Yeah, so the information that was in that review was partly found by PricewaterhouseCoopers, who they paid to do the review, but also by the RSU's own audit committee made up of board members who also went through PwC's findings and worked on it that way as well. So they basically categorized the expenses into things that had receipts, things that didn't have receipts, things that didn't follow the proper process, and they narrowed things down into 4 different categories. Now, I can't tell you all those 4 categories off the top of my head, but I can tell you about the most interesting one, which is category 4. Okay. So category 4 was $127,000 worth of expenses that they couldn't find proper documentation for. Now, that doesn't mean that all of those were not proper expenses. It just means that they didn't have the necessary documentation for them. And then the RSU's audit committee went through those expenses even more, broke everything down, and they found that there was $99,477 that they couldn't verify the legitimacy of. And so that's the number right now that's kind of up in the air. The audit committee also found that a former RSU president retained a new lawyer for the RSU, new legal counsel, and paid for the lawyer's first-class trip to India, which totaled $36,000.
Okay. And Adam, one of the biggest questions around the university terminating its agreement with the RSU is, what does this mean for equity service centers? What services do equity centers provide for students?
So what I can say about that is that the services, well, I'll start with the services that we provide. So the services that we provide are access for one. We run ASL classes every semester. Both semesters we've run 2 sections. Despite, the university withholding our fees, we're still continuing to provide these services. We run the MAD Students Collective, which is a safe space in our office, alternating on certain Fridays, just for students who identify as MAD or neurodivergent to feel safe in those spaces. Other spaces, they'll have community care nights, paint nights, craft nights, just sort of safe spaces for communities who are marginalized respective to the 7 centers that we have, and they run different events in relation to the communities that they identify with, and it'll be a real shame that if when all is said and done, if the RSU is no longer operating, these services will shut down. We're a subsidy of the RSU, and that's the nature of how we are organized, and I think that it'll be a real shame. I don't really know what will happen. I don't know what it'll mean for everybody, but for the equity service centers, we just won't get to help the communities that we so passionately care about and that we are there to do. So.
So on January 24th, 2020, Ryerson terminated its agreement with the RSU. In a statement, Jem McMillan, Vice Provost Student, said effective immediately, the university no longer recognizes the RSU as an official student government representing Ryerson students. The university has lost confidence in the RSU's ability to represent students with good governance and to supply the services that students pay for. Sharina, what events or actions did Ryerson say led them to losing this confidence in the RSU?
Yeah, so initially Ryerson said that the RSU failed to meet several deadlines for renegotiating their operating agreement, which was one of the conditions that Ryerson set out after those credit card statements were revealed last year. So there were a lot of different negotiation deadlines set up throughout the year. Ryerson says the RSU didn't meet those. The RSU says that they didn't have to legally renegotiate that agreement anyways. So just this week, actually, Ryerson released a very detailed breakdown of timeline, of how they say talks broke down between them and the RSU. They also kind of generally say that they felt there was a lack of transparency from the union, and they keep stressing in their communications about a new student union and new student government that they're really looking for accountability and transparency in their communications with that new government.
The RSU is still holding a general election as planned, despite the school saying they aren't recognizing the RSU as an official union. Amanda Pope asked candidates what they would do to regain the school's trust if elected. Here's their answers.
I would spend the next few months ensuring that students are aware of the services that the RSU provides. I find that the issue is really a marketing issue. These services are needed and these services are being utilized, just not on a scale that would be representative of Ryerson students.
Ask the students on how happy or in what direction would they want the student union to move in. If they want this current student union to be revived and restructured, we're going to move forward in that direction, and we have plans for that. But if they are in favor of the university, then we're definitely going to move forward with that.
Every year the execs are changing, people are changing. One of these years, maybe our team will do an amazing job and we can gain the trust back. By making sure that RSU is the most efficient and most effective, I think we can get back the trust of the students and the university.
Pre-coverage of tonight's RSU candidates debate. Adam, as someone who's been involved with the RSU for a few years and someone who ran as president, what has voter turnout been like in the past?
So it generally hovers between, actually I don't know where it hovers in between. I'm not really one to comment on voter turnout. I know that there are archives in other places that you can figure out where voter turnout can be found, but I know that it 100% of students aren't engaged. So there is lower than the entire student body's voter turnout.
And I understand that the voting is going to look a little different this year compared to past years. I guess could you both explain that, what you know about it?
Yeah. So what we do know is that because the RSU is now no longer recognized by the university, they don't have all of the privileges that that recognition would involve. And so part of that means that they're limited in the spaces where they can kind of hold certain activities. So usually we vote online through our RAMS accounts. This year voting is going to be in the SCC, 9 to 6 most days, 9 to 4 on Friday, the last day of voting. So that's one big difference. I think obviously there is value in having things online because it's accessible to a lot more people. As we know, this is a commuter school, so not everyone's on campus every day. So certainly not having the voting be online, but having it be in person, I can assume that's going to mean a lower voter turnout. I can also kind of assume that some students are maybe confused about what this election means when we have these larger questions. And some students might agree with Ryerson, they might not recognize the RSU as their student government. And so all of those kind of questions up in the air, I'm thinking that it's going to be a lower than normal voter turnout. It's also worth noting that last year, after the credit card scandal happened, the Ryersonian actually reported that Ryerson had its lowest voter turnout in 5 years since 2014. So even when there's these big issues happening that you think maybe would galvanize students to get out and vote, that's not always the case. And like Adam said, we don't have 100% of students participating. I don't think any school really has 100%, but there's always work to be done in that regard. But there's so many different factors up in the air this year. So I'm very curious to see what those numbers look like.
Voter apathy is very widespread, not just in student governments, but especially in student governments. I'm thinking about it from a candidate's perspective. There is the skeleton of a strategy. You know, you go around, you would get people to vote on their phones. You know, hey, have you voted in the RSU elections yet? And now it's like, okay, you can vote in this one building, and you have to bring proof of enrollment, and you have to vote in paper ballots. And I wasn't around when they were doing paper ballots because they used to up until 2015, I believe. So I don't really know what the transition was like between paper ballots and electronic voting, and if things got better in terms of voter turnout. But I think I'm with Sharina that things might be a little different this year.
So a major theme this year is transparency and whether or not students are aware of what's happening with their union. Amanda Pope asked our candidates how they will improve transparency within the RSU.
and change the structure of the RSU to ensure that that is met.
All the financial documents, not just the financial documents, but every single document of the organization needs to be public. Transparency comes a lot with the communication. Students needs to be communicated at every single point of the time that where every single dollar has been spent.
By doing bylaw changes is by forcing ourselves and future execs to be transparent. Our main goal is not to just make ourselves transparent. Our main goal is to make sure that future execs, people coming into the RSU, maybe 10 years later, 50 years later, they are held accountable. I think this could be done by changing the bylaws and making sure the rules are implemented and making sure the students are also very engaged with the RSU so that everything is also uploaded online and students can see what is going on.
So back to that voting thing, we decided to ask Ryerson students about their choice to vote or not to vote. Here's what they had to say in the special segment of Rye Replies. It's hard to believe what's been going on with the RSU. From the university terminating their agreement, to the RSU taking legal action, and to the university saying they still plan on going forward with creating a new student government. But the RSU is saying they still plan on holding general elections this week. We wanted to hear your thoughts about what's been going on. Here's what you had to say.
I think the RSU has overstayed its welcome at this point. I don't really understand how anyone could support them after, their leader is able to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on, his own personal expenses. And now that they've failed to, maintain order after a year's time from when that happened, I think it's for the best that, they're going to part with the university.
I definitely need to do a little more research, but I'm going to vote for sure. Just because, they play a huge role in university life. So I want to be a part of that. I want to have my vote pretty much as a student.
I will not be voting in the RSU general election because I'm from out of town. I'm from Windsor, Ontario, so I will not be commuting 4+ hours to come and vote. So I'm at a disadvantage to not be able to vote because it's not online this year.
I'll vote because it partially legitimizes having a student government by having students vote. Not many people do, and it's I do believe in voting. It's important, but having a student government makes a difference even if they are quite often not run very well. So I'll be just showing my support and trying to make sure that I have a say in what's going on, because it's hard to complain about something if you don't take any action one way or another.
So back to transparency. Adam, as someone who's involved with the RSU, what have you learned about transparency?
I think that from being involved in so many different elections and now being staff, I've understood that transparency is something that students very much value. I would understand it. You're paying, close to $80 in fees. You want to know where your money's going. And I think that the Students' Union recognizes that. And that this year, and especially with everything that's happened, the Student Union has been very transparent with its membership as to what's the word I'm looking for? To the sort of chain of events of what's happened, where they're going, what they're looking to. And I think that students value that above all else. They don't care about Six Fest or any of these big concerts. They care about what their student union is doing, and I respect that. So, as Equity Service Center staff, I feel very comfortable going upstairs and being like, hey, where are we at with X, Y, and Z? And I think that this term, this Students' Union has been very effective in transferring that transparency to the entire student body. So transparency is important, is what I'll say.
Shrina, I know you recently reported on the similarities between RSU's situation and the situation at University of Ottawa. Could you just take us through those similarities and what else you learned from reporting on this story?
I'd love to. So yeah, when I first heard about what was happening at Ryerson, I immediately thought of the University of Ottawa. I have a few friends who go there, and last year when I was reporting on the credit card stories, they kept saying oh, this is kind of happening at our university also. And so it was really interesting for me to see the parallels between those two stories, because it's rare for a student union to go through this, to have its agreement terminated by the university, but it's not unprecedented. And I think that the University of Ottawa either offers a roadmap or maybe a cautionary tale, depending on how you see the things that happened there. So one key difference is that at the University of Ottawa, the administration gave the old student union 90 days notice before they terminated the agreement. In that time, they waited to receive the results of the forensic audit that was done. And at the end of the 90 days, they said, you know, our confidence still isn't restored. We're going to go ahead and do this. The difference, obviously, at Ryerson is that the RSU found out just basically when the university released the decision. There was no prior notice, and it was effective immediately. Another difference in terms of how things could proceed is that the RSU is in the SCC, which is owned and managed by the Palin Foundation and by the student groups who are there themselves. So it's actually a building that's not owned by the university. At the University of Ottawa, the university did own that office space, and so that kind of transition looked a little bit different. But in terms of the similarities, the same thing that's happening here at Ryerson with the administration going forward to create a new student government is also what happened at the University of Ottawa. Something interesting that happened there is the old student union, the SFUO, actually re-ran in that election. And so students were deciding who they wanted to represent them, a new students union or the SFUO. I'm not sure at Ryerson whether or not the RSU might be allowed to kind of rerun in that referendum, which is going to happen in March. But assuming that the RSU doesn't run, or if it does run, it's not selected and students vote for a new student government structure, then it's going back to that question of whether or not the RSU is going to recognize that new structure. If they do recognize it and they dissolve, then there's going to have to be some kind of service, like transfer of services between the two. Obviously the equity centers, will they just be transferred? At the University of Ottawa, they had their new student government come in May 2019, and their equity service centers, their equivalent of those centers at Ryerson, are still reopening. They had 4 businesses. They decided to close one because it wasn't profitable, and those other ones are still closed. So it's not necessarily a seamless process. At the University of Ottawa, they also had to pay off the old union's debts. So there's a lot of kind of complicated logistics that I never even thought about until I talked to some people and learned exactly what happened at the University of Ottawa. And I think if that same situation unfolds here, we're going to be seeing some of those challenges in the next couple months.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sharina and Adam, for joining us today and keeping us all informed. Before we go to the debate, let's check in with the candidates one last time. Amanda Pope asked them what specific initiative they wanted to introduce to the RSU and how it would benefit students. Here are their answers.
We must change the bylaws and change the structure. An initiative that's incredibly near and dear to our heart is reinstating the academic and career grants, which enable students who are in co-op and in placements to still earn a living wage and to be able to support themselves without having to work up to 80 hours a week.
We're going to ask the students about what they think, what their opinion is, and we will lead them in the direction of whatever the students end up deciding.
Making projects that will earn the RSU revenues so that we don't only have to survive off student levy, and we can still provide students with the services that they need, from day to day, the health and dental, the equity service centers, those are essential, and I never wanted to be under threat like it is now.
Well, there you have it, your 2020 to 21 RSU candidates. Polls open tomorrow in the Student Campus Center and are open until Friday. Stay tuned on the Ryersonian Facebook page for our live stream of the RSU debate. Thanks for watching.